we maintain our joy and our community connections and our nonviolent activities because they draw a stark contrast to the authoritarians that are all about violence and destruction.
Well, hello and welcome back to In the Meanwhile. I'm Marcus Harrison Green.
And I'm Nora Kenworthy. Welcome to, as Marcus put it in an excellent piece for The Stranger this week, the season of Trump spice lattes. Emphasis on spicy and orange.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
I first need to start by apologizing to our listeners. In last week's 8 Ounces of Joy, I made the grave error of expressing both pride and excitement about the Mariners, who then promptly lost 3 games in a row and will not be going to the World Series.
Nora, you should have known better than to use the phrase "don't want to jinx this" and the Mariners in the same
I truly
sentence.
yes.
I was, because we literally recorded the day, right before. No, I think it was the day of the game that they ended up losing, and I remember just sitting there looking at it like, oh no,
It's
oh no,
it's my
it's
fault.
happening,
Yeah,
it's happening.
yeah. Um, I feel like I need to do one of those, like, Instagram apologies to our listeners where I, tell you how sincerely sorry I am that I'm reflecting on my choices and taking some time to reconnect with my sense of pessimism about Seattle team sports and vowing to never again mention sports on the radio, especially because it is not my area of expertise.
If it means anything, Nora, that's the default setting of most Seattleites. So, I think you're in good company, my friend. You're in good company. I w- I will say that the only silver lining this week is that Trump's behavior was far, far more embarrassing than the Mariners pitching lineup, which was pretty embarrassing. I'm not gonna
Yes.
lie to you. But clearly Trump has not read Michelle Obama's Becoming, because instead of "when they go low, we go high," Trump truly cemented his status as the poster boy for "when they go high, I go low," and I mean real low, like low, low. I couldn't
Like, it was
I couldn't do
hard
his
for
voice again.
media to report low.
Yes.
Because while 7 million patriotic Americans peacefully marched in the streets this week, Trump released an AI-generated video of himself in a crown flying a warplane that was dumping actual feces
Yes.
onto the heads of protesters.
Yeah, which the media danced around, calling it brown sludge
Mhm.
for for a while before everyone with eyes pointed out that it was definitely really, feces. And that the president has the maturity of a 7-year-old drawing poop emojis on his homework. And really quickly, because somebody had reached out and they're like, "When you guys say the media, could you be clear we're not all lumped together?" And so yes, there are definitely
Okay, fair.
independent journalists who called it out for what it was. But when we say media, we're talking about large scale legacy capitalistic media such as the New York Times, Washington
Mhm.
Post, the usual
Mhm.
suspects. So there you go. With that caveat. With that caveat. Yes.
It was really fun to watch the Trump PR team, though, devolve in real time over the No Kings protests. Like, first they tried to say it was paid actors, which is an old line at this point. And then they tried to paint all of the people who are, trying to protect the Constitution and uphold democracy as anti-American. And then they were like, "Oh yeah, no. Heck yeah. Trump's our king." And they just, released a bunch of AI images of him in a crown. And we all thought Alanis Morissette had a fragile understanding of the word irony.
I will Yeah, I think isn't there only like actual like two cases of irony in that actual
Okay,
song?
I don't think
Anyway.
we need to, rehash that '90s argument, Marcus.
So I was, I had my 20th, college reunion this week. I was down memory lane. My apologies. Anyway, but yes, Trump's prolonged tantrum also involved demolishing parts of the White House this week in order to make
Mhm.
room for his new gilded ballroom. In other efforts to shore up his fragile ego, advisors presented Trump with a tiny model of proposed Arc de Trump on the Potomac River, which yeah, that's while we're, cutting jobs and so forth at
Mhm.
the federal level.
Yep.
This is going on. So
Delight
priorities, folks. Priorities.
It really is starting to feel like DC is being redesigned by a team of like Imelda Marcos and Liberace, who are like supplied with an unlimited budget of gold spray paint and a home goods gift card. It's so tasteless.
I um I just I don't know, man. I just don't know. I don't know, like I'm literally at a lost words and I write them for a living, so that's a bad thing. But I will say, to cap off this little spending spree, Christy Nome bought not one, but two private
Ew.
jets for her work at DHS, which I didn't know she was doing any work at DHS besides,
Not really.
these terrible, terrible public service announcements that are just, essentially like fascist
Yes.
rhetoric here. But anyway, you didn't think she'd be visiting Americans unlawfully detained in prisons in El Salvador by flying commercial, though, I guess.
No,
So
that's not her
here we are.
style. But Marcus, that's not all that happened this week.
Oh,
Since news came out this week that since Trump was elected, ICE has spent more than $70 million on weapons, including, and I quote, guided missile warheads and explosive components. These weapons are apparently needed for, I don't know, taking down protesters in inflatable frog costumes in Portland.
oh my God. Again, Nora, like I am hopeful. I was just hopeful that this was like an episode of the Twilight Zone, but then I'm realizing we are been living in this prolonged episode now for the last 9 months. But I say it is worth noting that the spending spree is happening while the government is still shut down,
Mhm.
has not reopened as of this recording, while civil servants and their families are unable to afford food and rent without their salaries being paid, and as funds for WIC and SNAP benefits are running dry. We'll pause so listeners can have a little primal scream into the nearest pillow or supply closet. All right, there you go.
And we're back. Can I
Yes.
use having a little primal scream as like my next out of office message for my email?
That might that I think that just might be sort of the year motto. I
Yeah.
think there's just, there's the year of yes that I think Shonda Rhimes, who created Grey's Anatomy, wrote. We're just gonna have like the year of the primal scream.
Yeah.
I think that would be a good memoir for us anyway. What else are we missing from this week, Nora?
Well, last week we talked about Nazi group chats, and then more of them came to light this week,
Oh.
including from Republican insiders like Paul Ingrassia, a Trump nominee for a federal watchdog position, who wrote of having a quote Nazi streak. So I think soon that'll be the new like Republican out of office message is just on a little Nazi streak. Thanks in advance for your patience.
I am so shocked that this wasn't a one-off, Nora. That this is, this wasn't a. My God, this is systemic, you might say.
Locker rooms full of Republicans behaving this way.
Oh my God. I mean, speaking of primal screens, that's a reason for yet another one, right? I
Yes.
mean, we have to absolutely refuse to normalize this nonsense, but we also need to celebrate some wins as well. Yeah, and yes, there
Yes.
were. While Trump and co did their best this week to drown out the good news, the truth is that experts are estimating the second No Kings March was the largest mass protest in U.S. history. It was peaceful, it was joyful, and full of people saying absolutely not to Trump's autocratic fantasies.
And as we say with all protests, the march is just the beginning, not the end.
Yes.
But we have an incredible guest with us this week to help us make sense of what this moment means and how we can use it to lead to broader mobilizations of nonviolent resistance and non-cooperation. Nadine Bloch is an activist, artist, puppetista, movement facilitator, strategic nonviolent organizer, is the training director of Beautiful Trouble, and a core team member of Freedom Trainers. Nadine works at the potent intersection of arts, culture, and people power. She has written for Beautiful Trouble, A Toolbox for Revolution, Beautiful Rising, Creative Resistance from the Global South, and We Are Many, Reflections on Movement Strategy from Occupation to Liberation. You can find more of her writing in our show notes and at wagingnonviolence.org.
Nadine currently works with a project called Freedom Trainers, which is hosting trainings with people all across the U.S. right now to help communities learn how to organize and mobilize nonviolent, non-cooperation as a major strategy for resisting and dismantling authoritarianism. This work is powerful because it is steeped in research and data about what has worked historically, and it's led by some of the most seasoned and expert movement leaders in the US. We could not be more excited to share this conversation with you.
Well, thank you so much for being with us here today. We're really excited to chat with you.
I'm really, really happy to be here.
Yeah, so we're talking to you on the heels of a second massive No Kings March this past weekend. And I think we first wanted to just ask what you're seeing in terms of the wins of this mobilization and what more you would like to see in terms of mass movements against authoritarianism in the US.
Huh, okay. Yeah, let's focus on the positive. That's a good place to start.
We'll start with the wins, yes.
We have seen, if you go with the 7 million number of folks out in the streets this past weekend in the US and around the world, I'll add, um, that is a great number because it's a building number and it represents the largest mobilization potentially that we've had, definitely in this administration. We can add, I think we've said it's the largest one in the history of the United States, in fact, on a single day. So that's powerful. My background is working against austerity and authoritarianism all over the world. What we do know is that protests and acts of public opposition, if you will, are important for making sure that people understand that there's an active resistance, that there are people that are out there that you can join. And so, as long as that is public and that we have a way for people to get onboarded to actually join other groups and then increase their capacity to move from just protest and persuasion, as these marches and rallies are, to actively disrupting harm and actively disrupting the system, this is a fabulous thing. And that is our job as people who want to regain our capacity, our ability to govern ourselves, our ability to determine what our future looks like. That's our job right now.
Absolutely. I want to ask you in terms of doing that job well. Freedom Trainers is focused on training everyday Americans to use mass non-compliance and non-cooperation strategies to oppose authoritarianism. And so I just want to ask you, why are these tactics essential in this moment? And why is it important that people learn, or in some cases, relearn how to use them?
So the work that we're doing is very focused on understanding the pillars that support this regime, or the structures that actually allow the authoritarians in this case to dominate and determine what our future looks like. And so when you think about it, you could actually visualize a building if you wanted, and the roof or the attic, the upper stories are the regime. They're being propped up by literally pillars. We think about them as representing institutions. And if the building is three dimensional, the pillars are three dimensional, and you can slice through these supports for the regime. We're looking at things like the corporations, the institutions of the business sector, for example. Faith pillar could be another one. Educational pillar, the NGO, the non-governmental organizations pillar. The judicial system is an institutional pillar. The military, obviously, another pillar that supports this regime. And why it matters what we do and move from just protest is that most of the work that we need to do, and that we've seen throughout history of authoritarians being brought down by popular people movements with not using violent activities. And one of the reasons, I'm sure we'll get into it, but we maintain our joy and our community connections and our nonviolent activities because they draw a stark contrast to the authoritarians that are all about violence and destruction. And so this is really important. And so the tactics that we do to move these pillars, we're trying to create defections. We're trying to get people to leave their position supporting the system and impact those of us who are not maybe directly in a pillar. We are absolutely directly connected to people in the pillar. So if you look at the military pillar, for example, the inside might be, the generals, and then outside there's other officers, and then there's the enlisted, and then there's the enlisted families and other rings of people. So if we're not in the military, but we are related to someone or we know people in our community are, we have direct connections to them. And therefore we can reach in and help people leave, hopefully, or defect, or at least change their position. It's really important also if you're a visual person like me, we're not just actually, it's really, we have to be careful not to push the pillars towards each other. We really do want to pull them away. So, not drive them towards each other, which means that there are different tactics that work for different pillars depending upon what our goals are. So, for example, if we want to stop harms happening immediately, ICE raids and other things like that, we may actually just disrupt activities and try to prevent harms from happening. We may boycott and do other forms of non cooperation. We might go on strike, collectively withdraw from the system that's not serving us. If we want to get, let's say, ICE agents also, or any law enforcement or Department of Defense or big corporate folks to join us, we might actually use a carrot, not a stick. We might say, there's a better world waiting for you on the other side of this. You also probably want to have a say in your future. You also probably want to have a government that has a way for you to be active in it and not face violence and repercussions for that. And so there's a whole spectrum of what we're doing. And, the other really exciting thing, besides the 7 million people that showed up this weekend outside protesting, are the number of defections we are seeing. So it's directly related to the tactics, like whether it's, the educational institutions, the universities saying, no, we're not signing on to this ridiculous agreement to shut down free speech on our campuses, or the Marine Corps um, colonel that resigned after 24 years saying, like, this is just not going to work. Like, well, this is not what I signed up for. This is a violation of my oath to uphold the Constitution. And so all this whole spectrum, this is sort of why I say we're speaking to lots of different people in lots of different ways.
Thank you so much. Yeah, one of the things that I found really powerful and inspiring about your trainings, and we'll link to the training videos in the show notes. But one of the things that's really inspiring is that you encourage people to see themselves as members of these different pillars, right? And with lots of different actions that they can take as part of these pillars. So, to give one small example of something that I know a lot of people have done over the last couple of weeks is even like canceling subscriptions to Disney or Hulu Plus, which I think I just saw numbers that like close to 4 million Americans did that. I mean, these are not insignificant numbers. And, I think some of these actions have been critiqued as sort of tokenistic or sort of like, I don't know, like sofa protest, Um, but I, I think part of what your trainings are doing is trying to get people to see them as connected to this broader whole of non-cooperation activities that people can participate in. Am I getting you correct there?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and there's a whole, I guess there's just so much to say. So I go getting, going into it. But we are looking at helping people understand where they are in society, what their role is, and what roles they can play. Many people, I mean, you can still find folks who do not understand the moment we're in, or they do not see it as an authoritarian moment. They either think they're going to keep their head down and it's going to be fine, or they perhaps think they have enough privilege to buy their way out of the problem. We need to understand that in the United States, we have experienced in different places different kinds of authoritarianism. We have direct experience of racialized authoritarianism. You can ask most folks of color, most black folks, people who live in the South, understand really clearly that there has been an unfair system for a long time, a way of controlling their movements and their activities and their income and all that. We've seen Japanese interred in internment camps, in World War II. So we have direct experience. One could argue our history in the United States is one grounded in misogyny and racism and white supremacy. These are all elements of the authoritarian playbook, if you will. And so helping people recognize that can help move people into understanding that we need to go from simply protest and persuasion to different tactics. We help people understand that there are a number of ways of doing noncompliance or non-cooperation, a whole spectrum that can be really impactful in bringing down an authoritarian. And in fact, in some of our trainings, we talk about 8 forms of non-cooperation. Of course, there's many forms of non-cooperation, but 8 forms just to help people understand different ways of supporting the action. So obviously, for there's general strikes or strikes generally. Most people in the United States who are talking about strikes in this way have no experience with strikes. They don't belong to a union. They don't know what a general strike is. So we actually will say, look, general strike in the labor terminology is one where there are multiple sectors walking out at the same time. So you'd have educators and trash haulers and air traffic controllers who all were striking or removing, their work from the system, their compliance with the system at the same time. We've never had one in the United States across the U.S. a general strike. We've had small localized things like Seattle in 1919 or Flint, Michigan in 1937. And so we need to build up our capacity to do this work. It takes a long time to organize a strike and to make sure people are strike ready. We also need to put in place what we call mutual aid or support systems, whether it's providing schooling for kids or lunches if the schools are closed, or how do you get grandma her oxygen if she needs it, if we've got a healthcare strike. Things like this are really important, and there's many ways to participate. And we have examples from our own history about how to do this, right? Like the Montgomery bus boycott, which went on for a remarkable 381 days. And it's not just, I often show in a training a picture from the bus boycott with an empty bus and people riding their bikes next to it and folks walking down the street. And you also know that there are people at home cooking dinner for the neighborhood because people didn't have time because they had to add a couple hours onto their travel for the day. So there's a million ways to plug in. Um, and maybe I should just go into the other forms of non-cooperation that we talk about. We talk about economic boycotts and tax resistance, and help people understand that these are patriotic, tried and true American traditions. Like, we got our independence from the Brits by engaging in tax resistance and boycotts and dumping tea in the harbor, in case somebody has forgotten our history. And we talk about social non-cooperation. How do we actually isolate the extreme right wing, those who believe dictatorship is the way to go, or an authoritarian? We need to just isolate them, make them look ridiculous. The stuff that's happening in Portland and other places with the inflatable frogs and unicorns, what we do in Washington D.C., where I am based, with an emphasis on joy and community celebration. At this Washington Spirit, our women's soccer league, the 51st minute of every game, we're chanting "Free DC" because we need to make sure people know that we need to have a DC state as part of the solution. So we also do help people understand counter recruitment or fraternizing with the opposition, how important it is to help people figure out that they can join us in a better future in if we work together for that. And we talk about judicial engagement or jury nullification. Many people don't know about this, but when we participate on juries, have the right, and it's also an American tradition, to not convict people, even if we think they're guilty, because we think the whole process is corrupt. So folks who were on juries, for example, most recently, like not indicting Sandwich Guy, for example, because understanding that that was a ridiculous thing to make a felony out of that case. But also from our history, we see that there were folks on juries back when there was the laws trying to stop uh, folks from aiding and abetting people escaping enslavement. And if they were on those juries and they knew that people did help people, in the Fugitive Slave Act escape, they would not find them guilty because the whole damn system is guilty as hell, right? Is problematic. So this is a tradition that we should engage in. Many people run away from jury duty. We're encouraging people to take it and exercise that right. It's a really deep right. And then we also talk about civil service and internal regime work. What do you do from the inside? What does it look like to do malicious compliance, to follow the letter of the law, no matter how long it takes? Hopefully, it takes longer to stop a harm or to make things smooth that should be rough, or to, we like to say it's really easy to get fired for insubordination and much harder to get fired for incompetence. So we go with do what you can from the inside. And finally, we talk about building alternative structures and institutions. This is all the mutual aid work, making sure that the work that we do is not just charity, but people understand the political ramifications of it all, and helping set up alternative governments or shadow cabinets or alternative environmental protection agencies or whatever you need to do to make sure that the good work does continue. So that's a big overview of different forms of non-cooperation, and there's many, many roles in all of it on all kinds of risk levels.
Yeah, it was actually funny when you when you said that it's hard to get fired for incompetence. I was thinking that it's kind of a requirement at this point with to work for this administration and the federal level here. But anyway, I I recently had a friend of mine. He recently came from Japan. They obviously just had elected a leader. While it was historic that it was their first woman to ever hold the position of prime minister. It's also unfortunate that she has some very, shall we say, retrograde policies that are very similar, um, and rhetoric, I should say, that is very similar to our current president here. And so, I know we were focusing on the positive, which is obviously great, but um, you do have a concept called authoritarian breakthrough, which sort of acknowledges the moment that we're in. And so I'm wondering if you can just explain that concept a bit more for our listeners.
Sure. I mean, one of the things that we know is that there's no American exceptionalism here, really. And what we're talking about is that we are in globally about a 2 decade long slide away from democracies towards authoritarianism. Like in any given year, it's like 2% of democracies fail, but once they start sliding, it's not a pretty picture. And we have information about what it looks like. And uh, we have a knowledge from looking at history of the authoritarian playbook about what they do, and it's a very clear playbook of direct investigations against critics, of federal law enforcement overreach, of giving license to lawbreakers like the January 6 pardons, regulatory retaliation. They destroyed U.S. Agency for International Development first because they were already investigating Tesla's owner, and all their work, Musk's work. They deploy the military domestically. The autocrat doesn't leave. They take over the elections and have them only for show. So all these things we can recognize in our own situation right now. And what we know is that if we don't fight back in a certain way quickly, if we don't establish a unified left front, Democratic front, united front, whatever you want to call it, made up of electeds, labor, organizations, faith leaders, unions, the odds of us being able to stop this authoritarian takeover are very low. In fact, without a people powered movement, a coordinated response, the data from history is that less than 10%, 7% of the resistance is effective in maintaining any kind of democratic structures, even with a coordinated response, a coordinated civil resistance movement, people power. We're looking at like 51.7% success rate at not going back to what we had before, which also we really need to be clear about, but even returning to a resurgent democracy. So those folks who unified and won got back to something better, which is a good news piece for us, but the odds are still pretty bad. And one other piece of really bad news I'll just share is that the thing that is there that is there are two things that are pretty different in my reading of all this from history is that one, this is happening at a speed we have never seen before. So fast. And there's a few things involved. The autocrats have learned from past uh, efforts, whether it's Hungary, Poland, Chile, you name it. But they've also now have we have the most extreme wealth inequality that we have seen ever, right? And we also have one more thing that is excruciatingly problematic is that we've never seen the amount of state capture of our data or the control over communication systems and surveillance that we currently see because of um, our phones and digital advances that have also been helpful in other ways, but it allows them to do a lot more quickly that we have not seen before. So, all of the history that we look at can tell us a lot about what we need to do: mobilize in real life, meet our neighbors, set up local community systems, prepare to and build our capacity to resist, and then, or build a better future. And then when we can actually intervene in mass noncompliance or non-cooperation, I'm using these terms interchangeably, then we will be able to do it and turn something that happens, a crossing of a red line, as it were, into a trigger event. And so that is critically where we are.
Right. I know there's that being said, like I mean, I know there are actions, right, and then there's the perception of the of our actions, and I was just thinking over the past weekend, we saw what what many people again said was the largest one day demonstration in the history of this country, and yet you had certain folks saying that that this was the "I Hate America" rally and so on and so forth, right? And as absurd as that is, right, it did make me think of ear earlier, in this year and then over the last 2 years, when we saw students demonstrating against the genocide in Gaza held to near impossible standards of so-called civility. And so I'm wondering with, mass non-cooperation by its very nature is disruptive. And so how should we defend against, such tactics, when people are trying to delegitimize our nonviolent protests and, call them something that they aren't?
Yeah, that's a great question. We sometimes use different words: people power, nonviolent action, civil resistance. I've had people be like, "I'm not doing that. I don't want to be civil." But in this case, civil actually refers to of the civic body, right? Of the people, of by and for the people. And when we define this term, it's really our capacity as ordinary people to make change when we work together without resort to violence or threats of violence to other people. We're not talking, and this is not. And so I guess the most important thing here is that we own this as we understand that the calls for civility undercut our capacity to actually speak truth to power. That I do think that it didn't, the right wing, sure, I bet in some of the right wing ecospheres, you would find that they saw this 7 million people as not peaceful, not joyful, not community building, not in the tradition of the United States. However, I think that because of the overwhelming numbers of people out and the overwhelming lack of violence anywhere,
Right.
the only
Zero
violence.
zero arrest as I believe.
No, there were a few
Oh, there
arrests,
were.
but
Okay.
some of them were
It was mostly people wearing Trump shirts, right?
there were some. There was some, woman, I think, brandishing a gun who was a Trump supporter at one demonstration, and there were a few other things. There was somebody, a police officer drove into a crowd and drove over someone's foot, but it was remarkably peaceful, and it was remarkably joyful. And this again is how you say there's an old saying, polarize to organize, compromise to win. It's an Alinsky saying, but the idea is that we are making it very clear that we are the group, we are the community who wants to build a healthy, safe future together. And the violence is coming from the state. And so, and I know that there's conversations on the right and on the left about this. We just have to emphasize how patriotic dissent is. We have to emphasize our history. We have to emphasize the morality for certain groups that want the moral and ethical call to build a better future, and to really respect human rights for everyone. And I think this is part of the reason why publicly facing groups have embraced this call for joy and taking up space And when we think about our measures of success, right, what we're looking at, we don't expect to bring down a dictator or an authoritarian in one protest. What we do expect is that everything that we do will build our capacity to shift loyalties, move people away from supporting the regime. We're going to try to reduce harm at all levels. We're going to show our capacity for unity and solidarity. And these measures are how we judge whether we're winning. There is a number going around, about 3.5% of the people is what we need to mobilize to win from the historic data crunching that has been done on how people win nonviolent resistance. And the most important thing about that number is not that it's the exact winning number, because some groups have won with much less and others. And what it reflects actually is not that only 3.5% are mobilized, but that 3.5% are mobilized in a significant and committed way. And within a year of that big mobilization happening, a dictator would have fallen. It means that many more people within the communities are supportive of this activity. And so that 3.5% number, the good news about it is it's a tiny percentage. I would have always thought that we need more than half. We need at least 51% to make the change. We don't. We need something between, let's say, 1 or 2% and 51%. We don't know what that number is, but it is what will make this possible. It's like 12 million people in the US. We're well on our way to mobilizing a significant number of people who will be engaged and willing to throw down in a meaningful form of noncompliance. So that's where we're going. And I do think that's also why it is really important to help undermine the authoritarians with these shows of inflatable frogs and people dancing and, hip, using, music and beautiful events to bring people together and emphasize our humanity and our communities.
Well, that leads me to the question that I'm most excited to ask you, because this is your area of expertise. And that's, I mean, you specifically teach people and practice how to use art as a tool of resistance. So, can you point to some forms of art that you're seeing in the US right now that you find particularly powerful and effective, or ways that highly artistically untalented people like myself can support these efforts and maybe even participate in them, besides just like buying an inflatable frog suit off of Amazon, which I'm not inclined to do?
Yeah, so first of all, let's expand the words here a little bit. Like, I don't even call myself an artist. I call myself a cultural worker. In fact, most of the stuff I do these days that I consider an art is my facilitation and training. And when we're talking about artists and cultural workers, and one of the groups I work with is called Beautiful Trouble. If people don't know about that resource, I really encourage people to go there, beautifultrouble.org. It's a toolbox of uh, and creative and innovative actions from all over the globe. Some of the work is available in 9 languages. So we really encourage people to go there and to think about, as Tony Cade Bambara said, making revolution irresistible, right? And the idea is not that you have to be a great artist. In fact, one of the things is that artists have a problem is that they're perfectionists, as are a lot of other people in the United States. I mean, that's one thing we need to get rid of. I actually didn't finish that thought from earlier, is that in order to like hold the ambiguity that we don't have the answer, we need to do experiments, and we need to recognize that, perfection is the enemy of the possible, and it's a white supremacist framework. So we really need to think about how we encourage people to show up with what they've got, show up with their culture, their full selves, and practice and try things and evaluate whether or not they work. And so some of my favorite signs are the little signs, like there's a kid that just has like put blobs of paint on there, but they're out there and they're holding their sign and they're proud of it. And what they're learning is that they should be and can be involved civically, that they can be engaged in the practice of democracy, because it's not a spectator sport. And in that means, like, I've seen people, I just was looking at someone I know who developed a Pillars of Power game, and they put it, you could take a ball and knock down the Pillars of Power at one of the No Kings demonstrations. So it doesn't require any artistic ability at all. Or you could culturally think about the work that librarians or people who are documenting the Smithsonian the Smithsonian museums, so that when the regime is shutting it down, they have a a basis for rebuilding it up when we win. Because eventually authoritarians do fall, right? No matter what. So we need to also to be visioning and being inspired and putting out potential changes for the future. What does our new constitution look like? What are the gaps and the holes in what we have in the system we have now? How do we move from a two-party system into something that will serve us better? And so these are all, I think, artistic or cultural questions, and the visioning is a really key piece and superpower of artists and cultural workers and people who come to this work. Um, so whatever you can do, do it.
Yeah, well, I'm actually glad you brought that up, and you brought up white supremacy because we know at this critical time, uh, the reality of protests in this moment is that certain people are far more safe than others in getting out and mobilizing, while Black and Brown immigrant communities barely feel safe going to work at times. And I can certainly attest to that with certain folks in my family. And so I'm wondering, how do you train people for resistance work according to their liberties and their sort of level of comfort when it comes to safety? And how do you encourage, quite frankly, just white liberals and others with power to use their privilege in this moment?
Yeah. Okay. So another really easy question. Um, but of course, I have something to say about it. So, I think, I mean, first of all, yes, white and people who pass as white and people who are citizens should use their privilege and figure out how to, in consultation and partnership, alliance, allyship with folks, figure out what their roles are. Whether it's as simple as working like I do with some Black folks who are like, I am not going to talk to the police. You need to talk to, if I'm with you, you're the one talking to the police. And we have that agreement, right? Like it could be that simple and that direct. It could be also, how do we contribute money, time, walk, and where I am in, outside DC, people are walking kids to school. They're going shopping for people, buying out the tamales from the local vendors so they don't have to be on the street corners. Like there are very specific things to do. And again, there are pretty much everywhere groups already mobilized doing this work. So look around, find a crew to work with, and see how to best serve what folks are asking for. And again, there is a risk for an analysis or an assessment that each of us will do. And we should also remember, Black folks in this country have led major changes historically. They were on the front lines of the civil rights struggle. Sure, there were white folks and allies involved, and the risk was taken even at extreme risk because they realized that they had to lead the fight in order to move people into it with them and make these changes. And so it's not my position to tell people what they should or shouldn't do. There are a lot of roles to take on, and there are some very courageous individuals. There are some people who are like, if I don't do it now, who will do it? And those of us older white folks who are privileged in many ways should, I would encourage people to talk to each other and figure out how to engage at a level that makes sense, because now is the time. It is also true, I've got to say, I know there's right wing, right wing social media things going out there telling Black women to stay home, to sit this one out. You've done enough. This is also really dangerous, right? Because in the end, we build this together. We build the future together, and we need to all be there to make sure that all the needs and visions and the rights for everyone are included in the world that we're moving towards. And we aren't. It's possible we get there without certain segments of the population, but I would put it out to everyone that we need to engage people and across the population sectors and work together to figure that out while honoring people's level of risk.
Yes, thank you for that. Um, you've mentioned joy a couple times in our conversation, which makes my heart happy. We try to cultivate joy as a practice on this podcast each week. I can also imagine that in the role that you're in, taking a really close look at authoritarian we can't even call it creep anymore. It's like speed racing. Um
Well, they're creeps. I like the double entendre.
Creep speed racing. Um, I imagine it's been an especially rough 9 months, to watch this unfold at such close range. So, what do you do that sustains your own practices of joy in this moment?
Yeah, I mean, like, this is what we say is, like, the path to authoritarianism is paved with people telling you you're overreacting. So, it's been that way for a while. I have been working on this work for decades, globally and in the US, and so, I mean, me personally, it is about making time to do things that I like to do, hang out with my friends who we go dancing or throw parties or whatever it is, try to get outside. I enjoy being outside. Don't do that if you don't enjoy being outside, or dancing for that matter. Do the things that will support you. I also know, I mean, I moved pretty quickly. I've been doing this. I have accepted one way or the other that this is the work, I'm supposed to be doing right now. So that is also a relief in some ways. Sometimes I think, "Why can't I be a normal person and just ignore most of this?" But I can't, and, my training is such that I'm ready for this moment and ready to help others, understand what's at stake and think strategically about how we can move together. And so I think that's I don't have a hard and fast answer. Eat ice cream if that's what floats your boat. I don't know. But, I do think it is the connections with people that are really powerful, and the people that support you or understand you or feed you in one way or another, whoever they are. And, I think, yeah, do what you need.
I appreciate that, especially since we have a rule in my household with my kid that anytime we show up for a protest, we get ice cream afterwards.
That's well,
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 we need to build a better party. That's my solution.
absolutely.
I mean it in every way.
Well, Nadine, just thank you so, so much for your wisdom and your insight and just quite frankly, just pragmatic and actionable steps. Yeah, I mean, there's so often, you know, there's conversations like this and it ends up kind of being a pep rally and we should have pep rallies, but then people are always sort of begging for an assignment. And so thank you for giving people, some instruction. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, and thank you for everything that you do.
Oh, no, I appreciate it. I appreciate folks who are helping get the word out. And again, like there are plenty of national groups doing great work. Indivisible's one of them that really moved the No Kings thing this past weekend. But it's not a but, and there's many local ways to get involved. Join your social action committee at your local mosque if you go to one. Go, you know, figure out how to mobilize those soccer moms. Whatever it is, just get engaged and do it because now is the time. We don't have we don't have a lot of, we don't have a lot of flexibility. There is no keeping your head down and figure out how to build support systems.
Nora, we are here again after another week, and I got to say that that conversation it was not only inspiring to me, but I think it was very pragmatic, right? I mean, we've talked so long about that again with marches and their place in sort of beating back authoritarianism, and I think Nadine was able to give context to not just marches, but other direct actions that people can truly have access to.
Yes, and I think it's her work and the work that she's doing with freedom trainers is just a beautiful reminder that you gotta practice this stuff, you have to
Mm,
learn it. We're not born with an innate understanding of what it looks like to participate in mass strikes, right? I remember, when we had lots of students protesting on campuses across the US over the last couple of years, a lot of professors were saying, this seems like a pretty good way for our students to learn what protest is like, to learn what nonviolent action is like. Let's take this as a learning opportunity. And at a time when the reaction to those kinds of protests has become increasingly hostile, I think it's really nice to have these reminders that these actions can be joyful and messy and
yes.
artful and creative, um, and that we can be imperfect at them because we're still learning how to do this, and it's a lifelong work of learning.
Right, and we can all cash checks, I guess, from George Soros, who funded these all of these 7 million people, I guess. I don't
I'm
know, but,
waiting. I'm waiting to see our
I
money.
I by the way, I just gotta ask you, like, just really quickly on this, like, how like, I think George Soros, when I was looking at the, like, top 100 richest people or something, I think he's, like, 99 or something,
Yeah,
or
he's not
100th.
brilliant.
Like, how in the world does he have that much power versus, like, Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and all these, and Larry Ellison and all these other billionaires who are sort of aligned with the Trump administration? I mean, like, my God, somebody's not doing their job, I guess, if that's um, but just a quick note, like, I will say, I was somebody who was semi-skeptical on, the No Kings protests, the first one, and then, having the second one and so forth. But I will say, over the weekend, I was actually at my 20th college reunion at California Lutheran University, and California Lutheran is in Thousand Oaks, California, which is about 10 miles away from Simi Valley, which holds the Ronald Reagan Library, and so it is very, it is a fairly more or less fairly conservative place in Southern California, close to as conservative as you can get in that area. And I will say this, like, driving up to the reunion, you saw just this swell of people.
Hmm.
And these were folks who, like, or I should say, this was the same community that when the Occupy Wall Street protests were going on, there were maybe 10 people, and literally 10 people, and most of the folks would be like, shouting out their window, "Oh, get a job! You don't know what the hell you're talking about." So to see what seems to number in the thousands
Yeah.
in this area, I mean, to me, it was very inspiring and heartening to be like, okay, yeah, like folks are getting it, right?
Yeah.
Regardless of, what they maybe used to identify as. At this point, I think, we're getting closer and closer, I'll say, to people being like, to waking up to there being sort of a unique strand
Yes.
of authoritarianism here. This isn't just, republicanism. This is fascism. And at this point, you're either on the side of democracy or you're on the side of, the anti-democratic minority that we have here in office right now.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, this actually directly leads to my 8 ounces of joy for the week. Can I dive in?
Please do. Please do.
Well, my joy this week was noticing, and this is the second time I've noticed it, but it felt even more present this time around, just how many older people and elders were out on the streets for No
Mm,
Kings. I felt like I was getting calls all day from older people in my life who are taking out their friends, like, with their walkers and their wheelchairs and just, like, hitting the streets and having fun and making great signs. I know your mom was out there this weekend, Marcus, again. Uh, and I feel like I'm just having more and more conversations with older people who are just so fucking mad right now. Like, they are pissed off and they are not gonna take it anymore, and I feel like we gotta harness this more. This generation is old enough to, like, know how bad fascism was the last time around, and I think it's really lovely to run into so many intergenerational connections, especially at a time where people tend to sort of, like, pit the generations against each other or sort of say,
right.
like, make us think that it's like a boomers versus millennials thing, and instead, it just feels deeply intergenerational and supportive and lovely out there. And
Absolutely. And I would just say, like, kudos to older folks for not just waiting around for the youth, quote unquote, to save us. Like, we are, we all have responsibility in this. And so, to your point, just seeing everybody sort of galvanize, under the banner of that responsibility is just amazing to see.
yeah.
Um, I wanted to share. I had, as tough of a week as it was in terms of the headlines, I will say I overflow with joy today. So I have two.
2
I have
whole things,
I have 16
Marcus!
ounces. I have
Oh
16 ounces to
my
share.
god!
So, so the first 8 ounces is I am so happy to see that there are several colleges who have rejected President Trump's essentially his fashion bargain of giving them preferential funding,
Yes.
should they sort of adopt what is essentially just, his his fascist curriculum, let's just
Mhm.
call it what it is. Um, and they're saying no. And grant you, yes, these are colleges that have fairly large endowments. That being said, what do they say? It's not good having FU money if you can't say FU. But I also want to say that was driven into stark relief for me this weekend, actually, because when I was at my 20th reunion. Not to make this about me again, but no, when I was at my 20th college reunion, we had the inauguration of our first ever Black president at the school, and just to see the sort of embrace, right,
Mm.
of diversity and equity and inclusion at the event, where it opened up with a Native American dance from students there, and then it
Mhm.
opened up, and then after that you had students who were speaking directly in Spanish,
Mhm.
right, and then after that you had this Black um, principal go up there and just say straight up that, yeah, no, we're under attack for
Mhm.
what we are and for our values. And guess what? We're going to continue to have these values no
Yeah.
matter what. And then afterwards, when he was talking to some of the Black alumni privately, and he said, "Hey, just so you know, you don't have to worry about me. I'm not no mother effing Clarence Thomas." And I was like,
Wow.
I was, I was to quote the young kids, I was like, man, say less, right? And so
He's like, "I guess I'm donating to my alma mater
right,
now."
I literally told him that. I was like, will be the first donation I've made since I graduated. So you got me. And then second, real briefly, is while I was down in California, I was able to catch up with another friend down there, and he actually is a cartoonist who works at a children's hospital down in Los Angeles,
Hmm.
and he specifically draws cartoons for kids who are terminally ill and dying of
Mm.
cancer. And so there are times where, he'll spend an hour with the kid, he'll draw an illustration for them, and then literally an hour later they're gone. And I was asking him, about why he continues to do this work and why, he's not hasn't quit and isn't, after 3 years and isn't just depressed all the time. And he said, ultimately, it's because, you know, you got to continue to live until you can't anymore, right? It's like he tells the kids, right? There's life still left to be lived, even in all this darkness, even with this sort of impending dread, if you will. And the more that he can help to provide joy, help to provide solace, help to provide some level of comfort, right? No matter how long it might be, um, that that's a fulfilling that's something that's fulfilling that we can do for each other. And so, in taking sort of that spirit, I just want to say, like, look, in I know folks right now are feeling many folks are feeling in a state of depression and for obvious reasons, right? And they're not sure what they'll be facing here in the next, month or two or year from now. But I think again, like I think we still need to remember, right? There's life that
Mhm.
is still here to be lived. And, sometimes all we can do is, be that person who provides a smile on somebody's face
Mm.
in little acts of joy. So I would just advise anybody this week, if you're feeling down and out, and I get it, but where you can, be there for somebody, for do a little something here, whether it's you might be a crappy artist, but bring somebody some tea if they need it, or a mocha, or something else. So
Or Trump spice
anyway.
latte.
Our
Never
Trump
know when
Spice
someone
Latte,
needs it.
yes. I make sure to purchase that from an independent coffee shop too.
Yeah.
That's our unionized one, our unionized one. Anyway, but but with that, shall we close out today's
Be
episode?
better. Well, friends, we'll never meet the dress code to get into Trump's gilded ballroom or Noam's private plane, but as Henrik Ibsen famously said, never wear your best trousers when you go out to fight. This revolution does not have a dress code, and neither does our podcast.
Not at all.
Even if you are currently biking naked through the rainy streets of Portland shouting "Abolish ICE" and followed by a herd of inflatable unicorns. Huge thanks to our guest Nadine Bloch for reminding us of the chaotic joy of protest, and to the whole team at Freedom Trainers. You can find more about their work at freedomtrainers.net.
And thanks as well to our producer, Jessica Partnow, who edits out our primal screaming, and to the incomparable Aham Aluo, whose music you hear each week. You can find In the Meanwhile by tuning in to KVRU Wednesdays at 5 p.m. or find our full episodes wherever you get your podcasts. Also, a reminder to follow us on YouTube, Instagram, Threads, and Blue Sky.
Most importantly, your donations and subscriptions to the podcast can help us continue producing the show. We offer a 100% guarantee that your hard-earned money will not be spent on demolishing patriotic monuments or high-altitude Botox treatments. You can support our work at inthemeanwhilepodcast.com. New episodes drop every Friday. Until then, we'll see you in the meanwhile.